Hey guys, welcome to our channel, the number one place for designers, artists and creators. This is Les, I'm an illustrator and graphic designer here at DMB. And today I thought instead of the usual software-based tips and tricks, I would go through the ideation phase of an illustration project. So basically how to sketch, how to take an idea and go from an empty piece of paper and turn it into the finished line work. I'm also gonna give you 4 pointers that I like to keep in mind when I do my sketch work. Now naturally everybody approaches the beginning stage of drawing differently, but I think most would agree that you can break it down to these sections. You need thumbnails, you need a rough sketch, you need a refined sketch, and then you can do the final artwork. I'll show you how this looks in practice. This is my sketchbook with the plans for an illustration I finished in my previous video actually. Firstly, I made some notes from the client's brief. These are basic criteria the drawing had to pass in order to please the client. You know, simple things like it had to be a kitchen scene, it had to have a main character hiding under this kitchen sink, they wanted a picnic hamper on the table, little things like that. Then the first drawing is a rough thumbnail sketch. Essentially, it's a composition plan of how the drawing is going to be structured. You can make as many of these as you like, since the idea is just to quickly and freely brainstorm on composition and perspective. Then once you're happy with your thumbnail, do a more detailed sketch of your illustration. Here I constructed my full scene that gives me a solid plan for the final sketch. Then what I like to do is make some visual notes, little drawings, or just words, ideas on how to make the final drawing a more interesting composition next to this sketch. This drawing fulfills the criteria of being a kitchen scene, but it does not have much style nor character. So I want to add more interesting furniture and objects that are more relevant to the story we are illustrating here. Then of course as the final step I make a new drawing that is based on my rough sketch with these changes. Later on I went over this final one with some markers to make my final line work. Now for the next part of the video I'm going to show you a time lapse of how I have drawn out my final drawing while giving you 4 pointers I used for my drawing. Now the first tip is to play with perspective. Perspective is single-handedly the best way to take an otherwise average looking composition and elevate it to the next level. It takes a lot of practice to be really good at this though. It does not have to be 100% accurate. It's probably never gonna be 100% accurate, but you know, don't strive for that. Just practice, and with most things, the more you do it, the better you'll get. Now if you feel like you need help with this, it's worth to have a look at how the great masters have done this in the past. My scene is a one-point perspective image, so I have looked at famous examples of that. Another good tip is look at architectural drawings. If you are building a scene that involves a lot of interiors, interior elements, furniture, stuff like that. Interior designers and architects do a great deal of hand-drawn planning and their sketches are very inspiring to look at. My second tip is do your research. Research in terms of style. I like to make a Pinterest board before I start a drawing and collect images I like. Now don't base your drawing on other people's drawings, but you will always find stuff that you can take on board by looking at other people's work. Interesting shapes, color combinations, layouts can be inspired this way. Also do some descriptive research and don't fall into the trap of drawing too much from memory. People who draw oftentimes think they have a very clear visual idea of how everyday objects look like, you know, a tree, a picnic hamper, a toaster, which is fine, but every now and then go through the trouble of slowing down and look at photographs of these quote-unquote boring objects, because usually there is much more to them than you remembered. Now the third tip is to strive for imperfection. Don't be afraid to introduce a little chaos to your composition. Let me show you what I mean. Here we have a scene of a tidy, perfect, neat classroom. And here we have the same scene which is a bit more chaotic. Which one do you think represents better what kids are like when they are in a classroom? Which one tells a story? Which one would you say is an illustration and which one is just a graphic? I encourage you to scatter around some random elements, leave a kitchen drawer open, have a fork on the kitchen floor, stuff like that. Our scene shouldn't be a perfect, lifeless showroom of everyday things. It has to be more than that. It has to feel like actual people live here. Kids who make a bit of a mess, parents who forget about what's under the table once they get up and leave. Little things like this will make your drawings feel much more human. And my fourth tip is to introduce some word building logic. Spend some time on familiarizing yourself with the story you are trying to tell. Every illustration has to tell a story about the world it's taking place in. Just as an example, I'm illustrating this children's story here that is loosely based on a creature of African folklore. So even though the story does not take place in Africa, I have left some visual clues which lead to the audience back to the old continent. I have looked at African art and furniture and contributed some of these elements to design my table as well as these lampshades in the background. Also, I went with this worm view, ants view perspective to show the bottom part of the table. It was important to me to do that because the main character of this illustration, this little guy who's hiding in the middle, he's only about a foot, only about 30 centimeters tall, but lives in the human world, so he has to constantly, look up to things. I'm showing the audience his point of view, this is how he would see a table, basically. Now, once you have found some interesting pointers similar to these, which makes sense to introduce in your illustration, suddenly what you will see is that everything has been put into place and your illustration becomes a story by itself. Okay, our drawing is done. So just to recap: perspective, research, imperfection, and word building. These are pointers that I like to keep on mind when I'm doing my own sketch work. I hope some of this can help you as well. Okay, like this video if you like the content we are creating, subscribe, and feel free to comment as well. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.